Okay, hello everyone. So this talk is going to be by Richa. So Richa Govil is currently with the Azim Premji University. She's working on professional development programs for people working in the development sector with a focus on livelihoods. She's the co-founder of Tree Society, which offers business management training for managers of rural businesses, such as social enterprises and others in the villages. The program is called CREAM, which is a certificate in rural enterprise administration and management. Prior to this, she was a director of rural innovations at Ashoka India, and she had a long stint at Infosys before that, in corporate development or corporate marketing. She was with a research lab at Berkeley, the Berkeley lab from 91 to 98. And if you remember what happened in Berkeley in 91, you'll remember that Asha started back then. So she has been with Asha since 91. So she has been a volunteer for a very long time. She has served in the board of directors. She was president of Asha. She was volunteering for, I think, close to 17 years with Asha. So over to Richa and her thoughts on her talk on livelihoods.
Thanks, Pradeep. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Hello.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure if I would be able to hear people in the room. So, can you see the slide that's up on the screen?
Oh, no, we can just see your Windows desktop.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Is it?
What about now? Can you see some slides?
No.
Okay, hold on then. I have no idea what you're seeing.
So maybe you should just open up the presentation, and hide the top two slides.
You can see something now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what I thought I'd do today is talk a little bit about livelihood, because I saw on the agenda that there were, or some of the mails sent out by Pradeep, you're interested in thinking about livelihoods and its connection with education. So I have been working in the area of livelihoods for the last 6 years, and the majority of that with a focus on agriculture. So I'll start actually with a bit of a warning. So most of my talk is going to be about rural India. I'm going to ask lots of questions. I don't have many answers. I don't think many people have answers to these questions, because if we did, I think we would all be looking towards fixing a lot of these things. And in all of my slides, I provided lots of data with references to government statistics and academic papers. So anybody who's interested in digging deeper into this, you should be able to find it. And if any point something is not clear, feel free to stop me and ask questions. You don't have to wait to the end. I have about, I think, 19 slides, so that should be good. So I started with, with the quote. I think in Asha we use all kinds of quotes, but this slide from Mandela, he talks about education being the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. And back when in '91 when we started Asha, we put the words, catalyze socio-economic change. And we all had a vague idea of what we mean by socio-economic and what is the social part of socio-economic and what's the economic. And so I think now, as I reflect upon it, 24 years later, I think it's worth thinking about what is the change that we are striving for, and in the context of that. So I'll start by this one slide on the latest data from SECC, the Socioeconomic and Class Census, but also from the Census of India. And I know that you've seen some of this data yesterday, but what I wanted to point out is two things. When we think about livelihoods, what are really the kinds of livelihoods that people have in rural India? The vast majority, if you look at the second half of this page, the vast majority, 81%, of households derive the majority of their income from casual labor, okay, which is a staggering number of people in households. About 30% are actually getting their main income from cultivation. And then there are tiny portions which are deriving incomes as a primary income from domestic service or own enterprise. And the one thing that's not clear in the current set of data series, but you'll see it as they increase more mature, which is that most households, even individuals, are involved in multiple livelihood activities. So they may do farming for a little bit, they may do some wage labor, they may do some agriculture wage labor, they may do some construction wage labor, they may migrate for some time, do quite a lot of things to be able to make ends meet to the extent that they are able to do so. Secondly, when we usually think about livelihoods, one of the things we know that everybody has an aspiration to is a salaried job. And you will see at the very top of this page that only about 10% of rural households have somebody in the household with a salaried job. It's a tiny, tiny proportion of it. So I think these figures are good to keep in mind as we proceed through this discussion. And what I'm going to do is walk you through some 3-4 key questions and then try to build up a profile of what would we want from an ideal or a good livelihood activity. So let me start, since most of the population is involved in agriculture, let me start with agriculture. So according to very, very recent data from 2013, the average farming household earns just over 6,000 rupees a month. And the average family size in rural India is 5.3. So you can do the math and figure out how much or how little money that is. So one of the things that that immediately comes to mind is, well, if 50% of Indian workforce, which I showed you in the previous slide, is engaged in agriculture, should schools have curriculum related to farming? And we'll come back to that question, because the question is, what is the thing that's holding back people from earning more income? The other thing I wanted to share with you about agriculture is there have been lots and lots of surveys of people engaged in farming, their children, and what they all are saying that they want to leave farming. And we'll come back to this question of why. But keep this in mind. The other trend that I have seen in recent years is there's a lot of push towards entrepreneurship. We like to celebrate entrepreneurship. But what we have to realize that in most poor households, entrepreneurship really is the last effort. Meaning that they've tried farming, they've tried wage labor, they've tried a lot of things, and they really don't have any other options. And that's really when they set up maybe a small kirana shop, selling different kinds of groceries and shampoos and soaps and whatnot. Or they may start a little tea shop or different kinds of very, very small subscale activities, which I hesitate to even call an enterprise. And most of them, if given the choice, would prefer jobs with predictable salaries. I mean, if you look at the most highly educated business people with AIDS, the majority of graduating classes don't start businesses. They go and get predictable salaries. So why do we expect that just because somebody is poor, they have to be an entrepreneur? They have to want to be an entrepreneur. So, and especially because they face many more challenges than your typical MBA. And I don't know if there's any MBAs in the room. But for example, access to capital. They hardly have any savings to begin with. Business knowledge and experience, they may or may not have some of this. They certainly don't have a business network which they can reach out to. And they also face other forms of social exclusion, because these are families that are usually, because they are doing entrepreneurship as a matter of last resort, they are very poor and they are usually socially excluded as well. And finally, there's been lots of recent research. In fact, I think 7 or 8 studies that I have myself read through, which talk about how these micro enterprises, the kind that get promoted by government programs, NGOs, microfinance institutions, none of them manage to raise families out of poverty. What they do is help contribute to smoothing of cash flows. So if I have a big expense, I can sell my inventory and pay for that expense, or vice versa. If I happen to have some savings, I can put that to this. So it kind of acts as a medium to smooth my household cash flows. It's not really building long-term assets for me, and it's not really going to raise my family out of poverty. So it's a pretty, so we should keep that in mind when we talk about or think about all kinds of entrepreneurship programs. Third thing I wanted to bring in is employability training and salary jobs. The picture you see here is actually from an old and continuing Andhra Pradesh program, EGMM. And what they do is they do skills training of rural youth and help them actually place them with companies in cities and towns. And yet, it's important to keep in mind, despite whatever that, or these kinds of programs, that less than 15% of families in India work in organized sector. Or if I could put it another way, most of the vast majority of livelihood activities available to be had by anybody interested in working are going to be in the unorganized sector. So we have a large number of people going after a very small number of possible jobs. And the majority of these jobs are in cities. So if you think about, if you've grown up in a rural area, what kinds of challenges would you face when migrating? And there's some fascinating studies about how people build sort of migration networks from rural areas into urban areas. If you're interested, you can look them up. Even more important, from an individual's perspective, can the salaries that they will make in, let's say, a job as a McDonald's server really support a family? Right? So it's okay for the first 2 years, 3 years, but at some point, when you are ready to settle down, will this income be enough? And to what extent is career advancement possible? And what I hear anecdotally from people who work in employability training for rural peoples and those kinds of organizations is that they're beginning to see some people returning to their villages because neither of these is a possibility. The income they make is not enough for a family, and they don't see any possibility of making more income, and which is a very, very difficult situation in India. And last point I wanted to bring up is about women in general. So if you look at, again, these are government statistics, of the women who work, and roughly 50% of women in rural India work, and of those who work, about 80% are engaged in agriculture. Yet they do not have access to the incomes from their own labor. So they will work in the fields, but the income from the sale of that crop will actually go to the family or the husband or the son or whoever the head of the household is. They don't have access to the income from it, nor do they have ownership of assets or any kind of security nets, whether economic or social. So the question becomes, what is really the meaning of a livelihood when you think about rural women in particular? Because a lot of times when we think about livelihoods, in our mind we have a picture of a boy or a man. And it's important to think about women, even if they're not heads of households. Even within a household, what is the meaning of a livelihood for a woman? And these are some of the things I try to attempt to get at in the next few slides. Any questions or thoughts so far before I move on?
No, I think everyone's just waiting for the next slide.
All right. So, I mean, here I like to pause here and have a little bit of a discussion, right? So, what do you look for in your current future? What is your meaning of a good livelihood?
Growth opportunities, opportunity to learn.
I don't know if you are
I'm not able to hear clearly, so if somebody can closer to the mic and repeat it for me, that would be good.
So I guess when I think about, oh, this is the mic. When I think about my current future work, I think it's autonomy and learning potential, because I guess I'm still very young. And when I think of a good livelihood, I think of healthy lifestyle with exercise and nutrition, and yeah, and I mean stability in terms of a place to sleep. That's it. I guess I can't think of too many other things.
Richa, were you able to hear that?
Yes, I was able to. Thanks. Would anybody like to add to it?
I think initially said stability and growth opportunity as well.
Okay.
When I hear livelihood, I think of when I hear livelihood, I think of like actually making enough money so that I feel secure for my future as well as my family expects. So when I say livelihood, I think that's what I'm looking at: security, monetary security for me and my family.
Yeah, and these are exactly the kinds of things that I would imagine that anybody who's engaged in any kind of work would be thinking about. So let's start with what is at the core, which is the money part. So income, how much income? So this chart that you see shows you in blue the income of farming households, and in red the expenditure that they have per month. And the various categories are the size of land holding. So what you will see is towards the left, which are the first three categories, people who own less than 1 hectare of land, which is roughly 2 acres, they are actually running in the red, in the sense that their income is continuously lower than consumption. And I don't know if you are aware of this, but those three sets of bars of people less than 1 hectare of land is actually 65% of households. And if you take non-farming households, add them up, roughly 75% of rural households earn less than 5,000 rupees a month. Yet the minimum consumption expenditure, even by the poorest households, is around 5,000 to 6,500, which means that they are continuously and constantly falling into debt, more and more into debt. And this is a very scary number when you think about the number of people who are in those three categories in the country. And this is why you see so much discussion about what is happening in rural India in terms of livelihoods, farming in particular, but even more broadly in terms of the debates around Narega and other kinds of security programs. So let's discuss about self-vision, right? So one of the first questions, because I work in agriculture, when I have discussions with people who come from a purely business or economic background, they will, I mean, obviously small farmers will have low income because they have tiny plots that they are farming. So it's simply a matter of economies of scale because they're not able to earn enough. And that could be a very valuable, which could be a very valid answer. But there could be other drivers of it. So for example, do farmers have access to information or knowledge? Certainly they have been farming for years, but does that necessarily mean they know what is going on? So I met with this bunch of farmers who own 50 to 150 acres of land. I mean, these are the 0.1% of farmers in the country. So we are in the way beyond the average spectrum. And when I asked them, how do you know how much fertilizer you have to put on your soya plantation and soya fields? And they said, we just know. So I said, how do you know? We just know. Okay, and that's the level of information and knowledge, and they have not really updated their knowledge in years, decades. Access to finance. I mean, the lower you go in sort of the social and economic strata, you find that the access to finance diminishes very, very rapidly. You could blame it on education, which has not really expanded their horizons, or other reasons. There's a very large number of reasons which I won't go into in this discussion. But what I wanted to do was sort of raise a set of questions. So let's say we understand that there is a problem. What can we do as a society to address it? we could argue that we can improve incomes from farming through alternate value chains, and which is a very common way to approach this, in the sense that many NGOs will collectivize farmers, form them into either a cooperative or a self-help group or producer companies more often these days. And then the NGO itself will act as an intermediary. And that itself has some challenges because there is very little knowledge transfer that happens between the NGO and the farmers. So yeah, farmers bring the produce to the NGO does the value chain intermediation. So, but that is one thing that has been done quite a lot. We could argue that we should include farming-related knowledge as part of education curriculum. I don't know. I mean, this assumes that children want to be farmers, right? And what if we all had engineering curriculum forced down afterwards? Some of us will like it, and some of us won't like it. So the question really is, should we really assume that just because I am living in rural India, I really want to be a farmer and I want to learn about it? You can argue that, well, okay, if none of this is working, why not help people find other jobs? But as we saw earlier in the year through the SECC data, there are not that many other jobs, even in cities, we forget about rural areas. So these are questions, and like I said, there are a lot of questions I will raise, and we can discuss them as we go forward. So, yeah, so what if your income and my income depended on the temperature of a particular spot in Jupiter on my payday? Clearly, that's not a very good situation to be in. But if you really think about small farmers, that situation is not too different from this. You do your best to guess what the climate will be. You try to guess what the prices that you get will be. But even for wage labor, they don't really have any predictability in terms of their income streams. And secondly, research has shown that whatever savings they build up, usually on average, every 3 years they're either a medical issue or a marriage or a death, something that basically zeroes out their savings. So not only do you have lack of predictability, you have lack of savings, which gives you any kind of security. And this is an even bigger issue than the previous one. This is a much bigger issue than having what level your income is. This level of insecurity and lack of predictability is really what drives a lot of distress. So again, we can ask the same kinds of questions. What is the solution? Is salary jobs the solution? Financial instruments such as microcredit, micro savings, microinsurance, or perhaps social security programs such as EPS or NADECA, or other things. People are trying all kinds of things these days. And it's really depends on what your social and political vision of a society is. And based on that, people pick different kinds of solutions. I want to show you a picture next. We've been talking about income so far. And this picture on the left side and the right side are two sets of people engaged in a very similar activity. I had hoped to run this like an animation, but it's okay. We'll run it like this. So
Richa,
on the left side,
I'm actually running it as an animation here because the screen is flickering too much. So I'm.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So on the left side, so what are the differences that you see in the pictures? On the left side is the woman in that picture is Karka. She used to be an Asha volunteer, and her husband Sriram. They left their corporate jobs and are now doing farming outside of the outskirts of Chennai. On the right side are people from a tribal community who are also doing farming. So when you look at these pictures, one thing is the same for the two of them, which is that their risk of whether or not what kind of yield they get, what kind of prices that they will get. Those are the same in the sense of exposure to climate risk, gas prices, etc. But my friend Karpagam has some things that the people on the right don't have, which is financial security from both of their corporate jobs earlier. Continuity in the sense that they know that they can continue in this activity for as long as they wish. Whereas the people on the right, they don't have that assurance of continuity. Inclusion in equity, I'm a physicist, and so these things, I like to have very specific ways of thinking about it. But what I've realized, having spent so many years in this space, is that you really have to think about what is some of these very soft and harder to define things. Like when they go to a market and want to sell their revenues, will they be treated the same as everybody else? Will they be given preference? If they want credit, will they be able to walk into a bank with a set of documents and be able to apply for credit? Can they be confident that they will be treated fairly compared to other people? And I think when you look at these two pictures, even though the activity may be the same, I think it's not hard to imagine that the experiences of the two sets of people would be very different. So the point that I want to make is that as we're thinking about livelihoods, one is the income level. We discuss the predictability and security aspects of it. But there are also things beyond income that we're thinking about. And whoever was in the room who had talked about things like stability and autonomy, you're getting at some of ideas. With the next slide, number 15, I want to tell you a story. So this man in the picture, the old man, he's actually the farmer I mentioned earlier about the fertilizers. He has an MSc in agriculture. And so he grows, I think, on 80 acres, something like that, soya in Madhya Pradesh. So I was being hosted by an organization, and we had been talking all on our way to this location that the profitability of growing vegetables is actually higher than profitability of growing soy. And so I asked this farmer that, I've heard that it's much more profitable to grow vegetables in this area, and you anyway have irrigation, which means for vegetables. So why aren't you growing vegetables? And he gave me a very wishy-washy answer, which didn't satisfy me. So after we left his house, and you can see the picture of his house on the right, he has a satellite dish and a couple of motorcycles, and his vehicle, a four-wheeler, was parked outside. But after we left his house, I asked my host, and he said, the real reason is that if you actually grow vegetables, you'll have to go sell them in the vegetable mandi. Mandi is the wholesale market. And because most of the people who grow and sell vegetables are poor, they don't get treated well by the traders. So I can guess that this man doesn't want to grow it, not because it's less profitable, more profitable, but he knows that if he goes to sell them there, everybody will assume that he's also poor and will be treated with disrespect. And so another question that comes in, and there's a very strong thread, everybody I've spoken with, sooner or later the conversation comes with dignity. And it's a very important consideration when thinking about the nature of livelihoods. And here there's another way to think about it. People complain that our school education system basically creates youth who don't want to work. And the question I want to ask is the low dignity of certain occupations an inherent fact of life, or is dignity a social construct? And if it is a social construct, how is it really perpetuated? What are the things that are happening? Things that are making certain jobs more dignified than others. So here again, I'll ask the same kinds of questions as before. So let's say we want to fix this, assuming this is fixable to begin with. But let's say, just for the sake of argument. So we can say, well, okay, this is not dignified. Let's help them find jobs that are dignified. So jobs that are not wage labor or farm. Or we can say, well, we can replace manual labor through mechanization and take more. And so it gives a more professional sense to the work. Or you can say we want to change the social norms themselves through mass and public education. And there could be many other, but it's something that's important enough to think about. And that brings me to the actual livelihoods construct. Which is on page 17. So we start with at the center of it, at the base of it. Obviously, the money. How much income, whether the predictability of that income, the level of security I have with that income, and also continuity. Continuity in the sense that I am assured that as long as I want to do this kind of work, I should be able to do this kind of work. And to be able to do this, there are various kinds of income generating activities that need relevant knowledge, skills, finance, etc. The next layer around are things that we get into which are more socially, which are tied more to social structures around us. So for example, resilience. So let's say there is a drought. Okay. Besides whatever savings I have, do I have a social network or a safety social security program, which gives my family some degree of resilience to be able to withstand whatever disaster hit my family. Inclusion and equity, like I talked about before, and sustainability. And there are structures, social, economic, political, that either enable these things or actually work against them. And around this, the third circle is what I would call well-being. And here is where the things that we perceive as individuals, like dignity, choice, purpose, and meaning fall under. And this is equally important because even if I have the other two, if I'm not treated with respect, that is something that is going to make me dissatisfied with the nature of my life. Or if I don't really have a choice. Amartya Sen wrote this book many years ago. It was called Development as Freedom. And I don't know if any of you have read that book, but he really extends the idea that the entire purpose of development is to improve the capability and access of people to whatever they need so that they have greater and greater freedom of choice in terms of livelihoods, in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of whatever I want to do in life. And so I think that this last circle really derives from that kind of thinking, which is something that we would all want for ourselves. And when we talk about learning, autonomy, a certain lifestyle, these are things that we want. We may mean different things by them, but that's really what adds up to our level of satisfaction with our work. And all of this sits within the the structure of Constitution of India, Article 21, which actually talks about the right to life, and the right to livelihood is subsumed within that. So if you think about this, this is the overall construct that I find useful, and we also use it at the university to think about what is livelihood and what should we aim for when we think about any programs addressing livelihoods. Okay, so with this, I'm going to switch topics to slide 18 and say, okay, so if this is livelihoods, and we want to talk about education and livelihoods, let's take a moment to think about what is education. So that's slide number 18. We talk to most people who have thought very deeply about the purpose of education, and I'm sure many of you have in the room. The first thing that people will say that education should help young people develop ability to think critically and reflect upon their actions and the nature of the world. And I mean, this really involves understanding the world we live with, the bad, all different aspects of it. The second broad category that they talk about is that we want to develop confident young people who are able to forge their own way in life, right? So they don't wait for somebody to tell them you should do this, or you should do that. And they're confident enough, they kind of figure things out. And this also includes choosing and pursuing a meaningful livelihood. And the last thing, the last thing that, especially in countries which are for the first time or even now, rolling out mass education for first generation learners, and even others, just like Anurag said the other day, education is fundamentally a social political process. And so through education, we want to enable long-term social change. And the change would be in the direction whatever we believe is the vision of society that we have in mind. And here also, I mean, we have many assumptions about what is the nature of society, what's the level of equity, what's the kind of livelihoods, etc., etc. Long list of things which define what is our vision of society. But certainly, education system as a whole enables long-term social change. And with this, we come back to our original question. So if this is education, and what I said earlier was livelihoods, then what should schools do to achieve livelihood objectives? So which brings me to my last slide. And as I said, I don't have the answers. I'd like to have a discussion.
But we need answers.
I have some. Don't we all?
Yes.
No, I think, I mean, not to be flippant about it. I think, there are certain directions there are certain things we can say fairly confidently, right? We can say that if we are, I mean, certainly there is a huge, as we saw from a purely monetary perspective, there is a very large percentage of population income does not meet their basic human consumption needs. And there is something that needs to be done about it. So what is the role that education must play? As if I look at the innermost circle, a solid, good quality education, I think, if it produces people who have the basic skills to survive in this society, would be a very valuable contribution in itself. I mean, even if we don't add any layers of vocational training or employability training to it. If we add some more layers, I don't know, I mean, that's very context specific and individual specific. I mean, I've been to employability training programs where everybody's trained to go join a rural BPO. I don't know if that is ideal, because people are different. I mean, just like you and I are different, all strata of society, people are different. I'm not really sure if that's maybe it's a short-term solution, and maybe it's a required pathway to something better. I don't know, honestly. The thing that troubles me most is really this whole predictability part. Because, I mean, I just can't imagine living a life where I have no idea, unless I choose to, where I have no idea what my income will be and when it will come and whether I will get paid or not. And that, I don't know, I mean, that's another question. What is the role of education in that? These are really, really tough questions. And people who have been studying and working on these for decades, I mean, they have some hints of an answer, but I don't know if there is an answer like a multiple choice quiz question.
Thanks, Richa. So it's open for discussions in case anyone has any thoughts or any other questions for Richa.
Very curious to get your thoughts on. Go ahead.
Yeah, closer.
No, it's fine. You can sit. Thanks, Richa, for the presentation. I have a slightly, I guess, broader question, or yeah, I'll just ask. So when we think of, say, okay, these people don't have good education or no way of getting a good livelihood or predictable livelihood, and then we think, okay, maybe we can change their what education they have or give them more choice so that they can go get other kinds of jobs. But I wonder if you've like looked at the thing of the economic system itself being screwed up. Like in the world, there is so much money. Like we know that there is this much amount of money, and it's just that like these people are somehow not getting it and somebody else is getting it. And later when we give them education, maybe somebody else will get less, but some portion of that other person is going to go to these people. So because the education system and the economic system is so like intertwined today, I don't know if it's just like, you know, changing the education system that's going to like change situations of people. It may fix this problem, but it might be causing another problem somewhere else, which we don't know because everything is like so complex when it comes to socio-economic issues. I want to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what you said. There are huge questions of equity in whenever we debate a question of livelihood or even education, exactly for the reasons that you, I mean, exactly the kinds of things that you talk about. See, I mean, you know, there are different ways you could look at it. We can say, all right, we want to build a more equitable society. What are the components of an equitable society? And I'm convinced, and I'm sure everybody is convinced, that education, a good, solid education, is definitely one of the components. But like you said, it's not enough. Not going to be education alone that does. There have to be other parallel processes that bring it about. There are also kinds of things like see, the government programs, I mean, I was thinking about your question. The various government programs, they're towards providing a security net. There could be government programs which maybe give some kind of marginal preferential treatment in terms of minimum support prices, or there could be minimum wage laws and so on, but they're not going to be enough, right? Because as a society, we really have to figure out what is the kind of society that we want for ourselves. And that is really a question that is derived from education, but it's beyond it, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richa. It's a very informative presentation. And I also, I'm not going to, I don't have any, I have a question about what you ended with. You said something like, I can't imagine how it would be to have that level of, to lack that level of predictability and income, not to know when I was going to get paid, if I was going to get paid. But we also know, and you also mentioned that at least 65, 75% of the people are living that way. And yet I think you're not alone. I think most of us in the room also cannot imagine how it would be not to know. And so given that the majority of people are living that way, and yet it's unimaginable to us, I just would like to ponder what that means about our education. And maybe the problem isn't with, or isn't only with the education of the poor, and what should we change about our own education?
Very important question, because where are we getting educated, right? We are all getting educated in private education system of India. And if you look at what do the schools advertise about themselves, you know, X% pass rate and Y% people who show up on the merit list, and how many people got into JEEE and whatnot, right? And if the schools are selling themselves, because, you know, education for people like you and me is all private, what are they really teaching within the classroom? What are the values that they're teaching? Is equity even a consideration? Is it given even a single thought? And these are very important questions because people like you and me, we have, you know, we have the privilege of having a high quality education, yet that education is purely economic in nature in many ways. So is it any wonder that we haven't done much more about the people around us?
Just a quick follow-up. I would just question whether we can call it a high-quality education when it is left as completely ignorant of our society and at a total loss as to, even it's not a total loss, it's a willful blindness as to how to address these problems and hasn't prioritized giving us the tools to overcome these barriers.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it really comes from what you were talking about earlier, and I think Anurag also mentioned, right? Which is that what is the definition of education? Is it just learning the subjects very well, or is just education play a broader role in society? And if that's the case, and I do believe that's the case, then our current private education system is failing us. And what I find even more scary is that we are the only country in the world that has ever tried to roll out mass education through a private education system. It's really scary. No other country has tried the first round of education, any large country I should say. No other country has the first round of mass education been private. And to me, that's a very, very scary thing.
So I have a question that sort of follows up on the previous two questions or statements, which is how could this be integrated into the education policy scheme in India? Maybe having community outreach or something of those forms to be part of a education, or increasing awareness of these issues. So how do these rather important aspects filter into our education system? And also your thoughts on how do we change our education system? Where does that conversation, how do we have a voice into that conversation?
Well, I think, while, like you said, exposure and those kinds of things help, but I think it's deeper than that. I mean, I think if you were to go talk to, let's say children in middle class schools, do they have an awareness even, right? And a lot of that comes from reflection. Our schools really are so focused on getting us to learn the subjects and memorize the correct answer, rather than think for ourselves. That even in very social and very topics that require deep reflection, internal thinking, I don't know how many of our kids can really do that. So to me, it's a little bit more than exposure per se, but it's more about encouraging thinking, just literally thinking about things. I think that itself would go a long way, right? And some children will reach a conclusion that we like, and some children may reach a conclusion we don't like, but at least they would have made an effort to think about it. And that also ties back to the role of the teacher, the part of the conversation yesterday. What is the role of teacher in all of it? Is it to give the correct answer, or expose and create situations within the classroom, or through the discussions, through whatever they are learning, that encourage children to think and think critically about these things, rather than just memorizing and repeating either what their parents say or what they're speaking.
Richa, I had a few thoughts. So one of the things was the slide where you compared the left and right pictures, with the right picture being of the tribal people. So one of the things, as you know, for tribal communities, there's also the forest, right? So if the monsoon
Yes.
fails, their second activity is the activity to dependency on the forest. So in some sense, tribals have been living for so many years, and they know what to do when the monsoon fails. The problems that a lot of these people face is because a lot of their traditional ways of actually surviving, even when nature is unpredictable, is because there are other predictable things in nature. If something happens in nature, which destroys one set of things, they could do an alternate set of things, right? There are fish, they could fish. So typically, what's happening with tribals or Dalits is that these traditional systems, support systems, are being destroyed by the development of the majority of the ruling class, right? So basically, their waters could get polluted. They could lose access to their forests because forests are cut down. They could lose access to the fishes because the fishing rights are sold to fishing contractors. So one of the things one has to also look at is that maybe, the way we are viewing things, the predictability is required in a certain way, but maybe the way the people have been living, there was security in a different way. And the second thing is that, if you've pretty much concluded that jobs cannot provide those kind of things, right? Like by your percentages and all of that. So why would we not think of the education system as preparing people to secure both the rights that the government gives, as well as fight the government wherever it is destroying their livelihoods by taking control of their natural access to resources?
Yeah, I mean, I have two thoughts on that. One is that, yes, I mean, certainly there needs to be a lot more vigilance and simply governance that doesn't exist in this country in terms of what's happening with our common shared resources, whether they are forests, whether they are water, whether it's groundwater, land, commons, all kinds of public and common goods are being exploited by a few for their own personal and monetary gain, including the government's own. I mean, I'm not just saying just personal, at the cost of large swaths of population. And so that's certainly something to think about. But at the same time, I would say that while we recognize that there are lots of different kinds of traditional livelihoods and ways of life that were practiced in India, those are hard lives to live, right? So I think it will be good for us to, while we recognize that, also recognize that they are not necessarily, not to romanticize the idyllic village or an idyllic forest dweller's life, because there's a lots of inequities built within those systems also. So just be careful. I would advise be a little bit careful about taking that argument to an extreme.
Thanks.
Ravi, you had something.
I was just Arvinda basically covered up. But I mean, if I was to follow up to what just Ravi asked for Richa and for everyone here, so at what point do we actually see a public education system that's actually enabling a person in the long run to fight against the public system itself? I mean, it's sort of.
Ravi, I'm not able to hear you clearly. Can you come closer to the mic?
Yeah. So it's a question for you, Richa, as well as everyone here. Basically, it just seems a bit, to me, in a very intuitive way, it seems a bit conflicting as to where if we try to get the public education system to focus on a way as to enable people to actually fight the public education system in itself. Why would they do that?
What do you mean by fight the education?
As in a Sanghar sense.
Fight the system which is providing the public.
Yeah.
But
Like,
when you say fight the system, it's actually to believe in democracy and take part in the system.
Sure.
So it's not against the system, it's strengthening the system,
That's-
which requires everybody.
Well, that's true. But when we say there is a lot of these activities, like eating up the forest and the natural resources is encouraged by the public system in itself. And then why would a public system, why would that instead focus on changing direction and changing policy to not?
So Ravi, there are two issues here, right? One is maybe the education system itself, the syllabus may not necessarily be changed. Like, for example, you might only, see one side in government school textbooks, right? But that's not the only way in which somebody is being educated, right?
Right.
Like, you can have libraries, you can have resources, which provide, like, what is the meaning of democracy? What's the meaning, why is there a caste system? Like, one of the things, we learn from people fighting on land holdings is this thing that Richa showed, that such a large percentage have very, very small holdings. That's actually very caste-based. If you look at the division between land and caste, you'll find actually that the lower caste actually have very small holdings. So, and there is an exploitative caste system in the history, right? Like in history. And as well as in the present. So all of these things actually the education system has to teach. If, for example, the words that both Richa and Anurag have used about viewed in a socio-economic context, right? You can couch it in those words, but if you look at the social justice aspect of it, it's a war. It is actually a war of the Bharat versus India, right? It is a war. Now India is dictating when I say Bharat, I mean the people who are actually being exploited. Now, okay, the education syllabus and all may be determining by India, but we as the advocates of Bharat have to somehow use those tools to let people know that they can be used, like in Chole, right? It takes a thorn to pick a thorn. So the educated person has to know how to pick the thorn that the other educated person is. So so the strategy of how it is done should be debated. But I think you should also understand the words when you say socio-economic. These are very academic words. But if you go on the field, then social justice fight is a real fight that's happening. It's a real fight. Those tribals actually are going to face the problem of displacement or problem of pollution or something like that, which is going to destroy their livelihood because the forests are cut down for timber use. And they have to fight the timber mafia. They have to stop what happens when their waters, fishing rights is sold to a corporation, is that actual goons come and prevent them from fishing in those waters because the corporation has exclusive rights on those waters. So how do tribals form cooperatives to take those rights back from those corporations? And these are the real struggles that are going on. So I think you guys need to see education system as preparing people also in some way of using our democracy, the laws. These are all in civics, right? Like, the Indian democracy and all of that. So figure out, what these are in real terms, real examples, not in intellectual academic words.
Right. But
right, and in terms of the education system's role in that, rather than the skills for a specific livelihood, which is important also, it is also how enabling people to be able to engage with our overall systems and processes, democratic or otherwise, and be part of it, right, rather than be excluded from it. And the other thing I would say is, Bharat versus India. But the fights are there even within both of these categories, right? So it's not, in my mind, it's not so binary that is Bharat versus India, because even in my own neighborhood, there is a lake and which is being polluted by industrial effluents further upstream, and it's it's affecting my quality of life, though not my livelihood yet. But when I'm sick, it does affect my job. But that's a minor inconvenience. But even within Bharat, right? We have, as a society, we have so many levels and of inequity and exclusion. It's just not one homogeneous thing. And within each within each category that you can think of whether an economic strata or a caste-based strata, you can find even more levels of exclusion, whether it's gender-based or caste-based, class-based, even some historical animosity between two particular sets of people is just incredible. So there are many layers of this.
Yeah, I just wanted to conclude because you mentioned Amartya Sen. That one of the Amartya Sen's thesis is that there are no famines in a democratic society, as you know, Richa. Like so, that's Amartya Sen's famous line, right? Famous thesis. That essentially just the fact that there is a democracy is what implies that there is no famine. So in some sense, what we have to work for, the education system has prepared for, is for people to use democratic principles, like the Gram Sabha. They have to their voice, and it has to reach the power holders, right? How to express their voice and to question authority. That's what eventually leads to the stopping of famine.
Yeah, we may not have a famine, but we have a huge nutrition problem at our hands in the country.
No, right. Famine was just an example. What I mean is to address the other problems that we have. The democratic, strengthening participatory democracy and understanding it and using it. That's what's important.
Yes. Yeah, engaging with it, absolutely.
Okay. On that note, we'll probably conclude this session.
We can just put her video on again.
Yeah. So, Richa, thanks a lot for talking and giving us this talk and giving us a lot of these insights. Thanks for your time. Hope you had a good time talking about this as well. We definitely had
Sure. Thanks for having me on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks again. And we are going to break for lunch here. I'm guessing it's time for you to. Oh, okay. So you can see us now.
Yes, I can see you. All right.
The rest of them. But yeah. Okay. So on behalf of everyone, thanks a lot.